Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Sally Baudet. Our top stories. Driving up trade tensions. The US hikes tariffs on multiple Chinese imports, including EVs. Beijing says it will retaliate.
Profits plunge at Alibaba despite a rise in revenue as the e-commerce giant faces stiff competition from low-cost rivals.
Human Rights Watch says Israel has carried out at least 8 attacks on aid groups in Gaza since the conflict began.
Anthony Blinken is in Ukraine to reassure Zelensky on US weapons deliveries as Russia intensifies its assault on Kharkiv.
And a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We hear from one of the Olympic torchbearers as the flame continues its journey through France. The United States has ramped up tariffs on some Chinese imports in a move to protect American industries from what it calls unfair competition.
The White House says new tariffs will hit an estimated $18 billion worth of imports, with levies on Chinese electric vehicles quadrupling from 25% to 100%. The import tax on solar cells and semiconductors will double, rising from 25% to 50%. And duties on some Chinese steel and aluminium will increase more than threefold, from 7.5% to 25%. Beijing says it strongly opposes the tariffs and urged Washington to immediately correct what it called its wrongdoing.
China always opposes the unilateral imposition of tariffs which violate World Trade Organization rules and will take all necessary actions to safeguard its legitimate rights.
Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, what will the effect of these tariffs be in the United States?
Absolutely nothing whatsoever, according to the Biden administration in a release this morning. I'll tell you more about that in just a second, but you should know we own this story. We on this program. I broke this story last Friday because you remember Zeekr, the Chinese company based in Sweden, they were having an IPO here, and just as they had a great success, news came from the Wall Street Journal that this was going to happen, and it's happened here this morning. It is now the leading story. Now, Biden says no impact on inflation, which is kind of important because everyone's trying to bring inflation down to 2%. They're getting there gradually, still a bit to go, though. And the reason that they say there's no inflation effect is because these sanctions, these tariffs are targeted. They're not sweeping and across the board like we've seen in the past. So, as you've said, they target solar cells, going up to 50%, microchips, and the big headline here is Chinese EVs coming into the country to be targeted at 100%. Now, the thing about this is it's all, those three things are all areas that the Biden administration has spent taxpayers' dollars on to boost American production of those things, solar panels, cells in particular, and also EVs. And the thinking from the White House is, why should we spend all these taxpayer dollars boosting U.S. production of these things and then have into the country cheap Chinese imports? We don't need that. That's the thinking that's going on here. And they've seen what's happened in Europe and also in Mexico, where there has been quite a massive influx of Chinese EVs in particular. Now, we know that BYD in Shanghai or Beijing, wherever they're based, is now the biggest seller of EVs in the world, but not here. Not here. It's all about Tesla. You hardly ever see a Chinese vehicle, and they are moving at the White House to try and stop that from happening. Now, the other thing is it's infrastructure week, so members of the cabinet are going out and about selling Joe Biden's great successes, which have been the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, and the Chips and Science bill. And they're doing that because all of those things, good though they are, there's a very long time lag before they kick in. And of course, there's an election coming up in November. And as you also say, it's not just those three areas. There are other areas as well, including steel and aluminum, lithium batteries, some medical equipment, large cranes, and also rubber gloves, rather amusingly. They're in there as well. I'm not quite sure why. Biden says, look, China is basically making things and selling them below cost. And indeed, the last French, we're talking about France now, the last French solar panel making company went out of business just a couple of weeks ago. And on his way out the door, the CEO said, we can't compete with China. because they'll make one of these things at $100 cost, but sell it for $60, and we can't compete with that. And that's what this is all about. China says, well, that's a load of baloney because you do the same. Look what you're doing with microchips, look what you're doing with Boeing and stuff like that, and you've got to correct what China calls a wrongdoing with this move from the White House today. But finally, the other thing to bear in mind is that reducing tariffs or taking them off is far more difficult than putting them on. It's easy to slap them on, but once they're in place, it's kind of difficult to get them off again because companies have got used to working with them, they know how to handle them, they've got their price structure, and so actually reducing tariffs is more difficult than it is just to blanket put them on, or in this case, put them on in a targeted fashion.
So, John, you mentioned the US presidential election coming up, of course, in November. Is this move more about politics then than business? Does Joe Biden have one eye on those elections when it comes to rising these tariffs?
Bingo, bango, bongo. You got it. That's it. That's all you need to know. Really, seriously, I'm not joking. That is literally all you need to know. The problem is here for President Biden is that in America, there are 50 states, as you know, and we know how we can predict every time how 45 of them are going to vote. There's always 5, maybe sometimes 6 swing states where we simply don't know. And right now, President Trump is far ahead in the polls in those key swing states, the ones that will determine the election in November. This is the problem for President Biden. Now, as you know, Trump's rhetoric is very super tough on China. He wants to impose 60% tariffs on China and 10% tariffs on everybody else in the world if they wish to export to America. And the thing you have to remember is that nobody in American politics, not Trump nor Biden, is ever hurt by attacking China. That's the thing. So that's what they're doing. Simple as that. Biden is trying to be tougher than Trump. He's trying to out-Trump Trump, if you will, in those key states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Nevada and Arizona. Meanwhile, what is always surprising to me is that the talking between the two capitals, Washington and Beijing, goes on. I mean, they talk pretty much every night, the trade representatives. They're talking at various, high-profile meetings about this all the time. And the key one, of course, is the Economic Working Group, which was set up after the APEC summit in November last year. They've already met 4 times, and I know that this issue is chief among the ones that they talk about. So it's happened. They all kick in over the next 2 years, by the way, so some of these tariffs are not immediate. But the talking goes on.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Tarrant in New York. Let's talk now to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's an economist and public policy analyst. Welcome back to the programme, Professor. Good to see you. So what do you think this rise in tariffs will end up meaning for US-China relations?
It's very negative. It's not such a small matter that it's just going to be smiled away. The U.S. is turning blatantly protectionist. The excuses given by the administration or the explanations given by the administration are extremely weak. This is just overt protectionism. It violates the World Trade Organization rules, but the U.S. is just blowing off the entire world trading system rules. It's defensive. It is unilateral, of course. As your reporter just said, it is all domestic politics. But domestic politics is one thing. International relations, trade, the world economy, geopolitics is another thing. And games that might be played internally, and I don't think they will have much impact, by the way, on the election, but whatever games are played internally, when they violate basic principles of international relations, they have serious consequences.
So these tariff rises cover various industries, electric vehicles, a big one, solar panels, aluminium, steel, for example. Will these rises make any material difference to those industries, either in the US or in China?
Well, China is the world's low-cost producer of many of these goods. That's because China's been investing in these industries for 20 years. The United States has been debating about solar power. China has built up the world's largest photovoltaics industry. It's not a surprise that they can outcompete Europe and the United States. They've been working hard on it. They've been putting a lot of money into it. The same with electric vehicles. It is true, China would dominate the world electric vehicle industry because The companies are extremely competitive among themselves. There are hundreds of them, as you know, though a few big ones emerging. They are the lowest cost producers. They are fiercely competitive within China's own economy, which has been driving down the costs and driving up the production efficiency, and therefore they can outcompete the U.S. and Europe, which stood around saying, well, we don't know if we want to do this green economy stuff, this climate change stuff, for 20 years. But China got on with it. So this is the basic story. Now, what it means is that in the rest of the world outside the U.S. and increasingly protectionist Europe, China will have very, very little, essentially no competition from the United States and Europe. So China will absolutely be able to win over world markets in the emerging and developing economies.
So does Joe Biden then have a point that Chinese products are actually stifling the growth of American green technology?
In a way, yes, they're outcompeting American companies. All of the explanations given in this press release, though, about China's unfair trade practices and flooding global markets with artificially low-priced exports. No, he doesn't have a point there. He has a point that China is outcompeting the United States.
Jeffrey, great to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us. That's Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the public policy analyst and economist.
Well, in that vein, car giant Stellantis says it plans to sell Chinese EVs in its European dealerships from September. Models from Hangzhou-based Leapmotor will be available in 9 countries, including the UK, Germany, France and Spain. Last year, Stellantis, which owns both US and European car makers, bought a 20% share in Leapmotor for $1.5 billion, giving it exclusive export rights. Envoys from the US and China are meeting in Geneva to discuss artificial intelligence. The talks in Switzerland are a chance for both sides to lay out their approaches to the emerging technology. In April, in Beijing, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi discussed AI, agreeing to hold formal bilateral talks on the subject. Apple supplier Foxconn has reported a 72% jump in net profit during the first 3 months of 2024. This as demand for artificial intelligence technology grows. The Taiwan-based tech giant said net profit rose to $679 million. That is up from $396 million in the same period last year. Foxconn said it expects revenue to grow significantly in the second quarter, driven by the AI boom.
Sony has reported a 7% drop in annual profits. Sales of its flagship PlayStation 5 gaming console fell short of company forecasts. The Japanese gaming giant saw its revenue increase by 19%, but operating profit still dropped. The company also announced new co-CEOs for the PlayStation business. FTSE 100 member and mining giant Anglo American has announced plans to break itself up, including selling its diamond business, De Beers. It comes after another unsolicited takeover bid from bigger rival BHP, which Anglo has rejected. Its chief executive is under pressure to prove to investors that he can revive Anglo's flagging fortunes. Melinda French Gates is quitting her role as co-chair of one of the world's biggest charitable organisations. She's to leave the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which she set up with her former husband 24 years ago. The foundation has spent more than $50 billion over the last 2 decades to fight poverty and disease worldwide.
Alibaba has posted an 86% drop in fourth quarter profits. This is despite a 7% increase in revenue. The Chinese e-commerce giant is facing rising competition from low-cost rivals like PDD. Jacques Roizen, the managing director of China Consulting at Digital Luxury Group, takes a closer look at what the results mean for Alibaba.
It is good news in a very competitive e-commerce environment in China for Alibaba to be posting a 7% increase in revenue. The challenge is on their profitability. The earnings came out at 140. Analysts were expecting 142. And last year they had a profitability of 152 per share. And that's, unfortunately not that surprising, because what we're seeing in the Chinese e-commerce landscape is that Alibaba is being squeezed by the emergence of Pinduoduo and Douyin, and the strength of JD.com.
If we also look at the success of companies like Shein, Temu, you mentioned Pinduoduo, they have really gone after the consumer, offering enticing bargains. Is Alibaba on the same page, or do they have catch-up?
I think you're absolutely right. The trend of Chinese consumers going after discount and seeking promotion has always been at the center of the Chinese e-commerce. When you think of Douyin and Pinduoduo, you're having the biggest discount and a great consumer experience. And then the other big competitor of Alibaba, of course, is JD.com. JD has invested amazing amounts in providing exceptional logistics and exceptional service. And so, if you will, you have Alibaba being squeezed on two sides, needing to improve the customer experience and needing to invest in promotions. It was expected, from our perspective, that their earnings would be challenged.
Talk to me about the way forward for Alibaba. Is it on the right track, given the challenges and the very competitive environment that you've just detailed, or does it need to course correct?
I think, first of all, we need to step back and realize that Alibaba was the dominating force with nobody coming anywhere close. Alibaba had 70, sometimes 80% market share across many categories for a long time, and it's just no longer the case. Alibaba doesn't have a serious chance at defending those market shares and keeping them at that level. And so they have to accept the fact that eventually their competitors are going to grow faster than they are growing. The challenge is, how do they position themselves? I don't know that it makes sense to continue investing in discount, continue to funding discount, to, at the end of the day, try to hold on to customers that are always going to go wherever the discount is the deepest. I think they should focus on the customers that are looking for a, better quality experience, better quality brand experience, and an opportunity to buy goods that they know to be authentic, which is one of Tmall's key points in the value proposition.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A standing ovation for Singapore's outgoing Prime Minister as he prepares to hand over the role after 2 decades.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The great transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today Every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Dozens of Palestinians have been killed in the last 24 hours by Israeli airstrikes on the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza.
At least 14 people, including children, were killed when a house in the camp was hit. There are more people still missing, feared trapped under the rubble. A school, which is being used as a shelter by the United Nations, has also been struck.
In northern Gaza, Israeli forces say they're expanding operations in the Jabalia refugee camp with tanks, bulldozers and armoured vehicles surrounding evacuation zones and shelters. The Israeli army says it's trying to prevent Hamas from regrouping there.
In southern Gaza, Israeli tanks are pushing deeper into Rafah, forcing already displaced civilians to move again. The United Nations says nearly 450,000 people have fled the city since Israel's troops entered last week.
Our correspondent Akram Al-Sassari reports from central Gaza.
Well, in the words of the spokesperson of the UNRWA, there is no safe haven in the Gaza Strip. And when those words are translated into actions, the actions are loud and clear enough that people of Gaza have nowhere to go. People who were in central Gaza were attacked in their area, not far away from here. At Nuseirat refugee camp, a family was targeted. Around 30 people ended up being killed and some of them are still under the rubble of their homes. People have been frantically trying to remove their bodies, and they are still removing some of the bodies up to this particular moment. This Al-Aqsa, Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital has been receiving dead people for the last hours or so, and people were weeping and crying for the death of their dear ones whom were brought to this hospital after they were targeted by the Israeli occupation forces. In Rafah, the bombardment is extremely intensified and thorough. Israel described the operation in Rafah as a limited operation. However, the developments on the ground are extremely indicative of the fact that this is a large-scale operation that is similar to the large-scale operations that took place in all different parts of the Gaza Strip, and that Israel is keen to control the full and complete area in Rafah. They have been pushing further into As-Salam, Al-Junaina, Al-Barazil neighborhood, which are major neighborhoods in the area of Rafah. And by controlling those areas and advancing more into them, they are technically reaching the heart of Rafah, which is a Nejma area, a Nejma square, which is indicative also of an intention to continue the process, continue the operation, and control the whole Rafah area. Az-Zaytun neighborhood in the very in the very south of Gaza City has been also seeing a great deal of intensified bombardment. People have been killed. Overnight, 8 people were killed in one aerial strike that targeted a house that used to shelter Palestinian internally displaced people. In the very north of the Gaza Strip, Jabalia, Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun, people were also asked to leave their homes after they were asked to come back to their homes, and then Israel announced a major operation in that area because they said that Hamas is regrouping and now they are going to fight them. They declared victory in that area, and I think now the Israeli troops are coming back also to fight again and to declare one more victory and then withdraw, waiting for this third victory or the fourth victory or whatever the number of victories. People and analysts have been questioning the authenticity of the statements that were made by Israel about the victory and also about targeting Hamas different brigades, because now in Rafah the fighting is coming to a peak where around 15 or 22 Israeli soldiers were injured. The day before, around 50 soldiers were injured, according to the statements that were made by the Israeli spokesperson, IDF spokesperson. So the fighting is still continuous, destruction is still continuous, and Israel is still moving at all different fronts of the Gaza Strip, including the area that are predominantly believed to be safe area. And the conclusion is there is no safe area for the people of Gaza. Destruction, death, displacement, and despair are still continuous, and Gazans have nowhere to go and protect themselves.
Ikram al-Satari in Gaza. Israeli forces have attacked aid convoys and buildings in Gaza at least 8 times since October, despite measures designed to ensure their safety. This is according to a report by Human Rights Watch. The humanitarian organization found that Israeli authorities did not issue advance warnings to the aid groups before the strikes. Organizations that come under attack say there were no known military targets near the location of the strikes. The United Nations says more than 250 aid workers have been killed in Gaza since October. Let's speak to our correspondent Martin Lowe in Tel Aviv. Hello, Martin. So we're hearing of a new Israeli attack. This happened, we understand, yesterday on aid convoys and aid workers. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the latest casualty is a UN security officer, originally from India. He was killed when he was in a UN marked vehicle with a colleague, which came under heavy gunfire outside Rafah. He's believed to be the first UN aid worker from the international community, rather than being a Palestinian, to be killed. So far, nobody quite knows the full circumstances and who fired the shots, but an investigation is underway. But this comes after last month, when 6 international aid workers and a Palestinian working for World Central Kitchens were killed when their vehicles were targeted by mistake by the Israeli army. Elsewhere in the country, in East Jerusalem, the headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has been closed after an arson attack by Israeli civilians. Yesterday, in the West Bank near Hebron, Israeli settlers stopped aid trucks on their way to Gaza and threw the cargo off the lorries into the road. And last week, Israelis in the south of the country blocked aid trucks with rocks that they spread across the road to prevent them going any further. There's clearly a sizable element of people here within Israel who simply believe that no aid should go to Gaza until the Israeli hostages are freed.
And Martin, we've been detailing the bombardment that continues in Gaza, north, south and central. Has this effectively put paid to ceasefire negotiations? Are any of those mediation efforts ongoing?
No, they're not. Now, Qatar, one of the main countries who were involved in mediating, they've said that ceasefire negotiations have reached almost a stalemate. Now, you have Israel, who believes that an exchange program for Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners should be done completely outside of the military operation. But Hamas, on the other side, they say they won't even consider releasing any hostages until a permanent ceasefire is declared.
When there are two parties who want to agree on something, you need to agree on the baseline, first of all. And I believe that what we are seeing, there is a fundamental difference between the two parties. There is one party who wants to end the war and then talk about the hostages. There is another party who wants the hostages and wants to continue the war. And as long as there is any commonality between those two things, it won't get us to a result.
Qatar is saying that its mediation efforts, in fact, are being pushed backwards by the Israeli army's continuing assault on the city of Rafah in southern Gaza.
All right, thank you very much, Martin Lowe in Tel Aviv there.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine, where he says the first of a major military aid package has started to arrive and more is on the way.
Blinken has told President Volodymyr Zelensky that additional weapons will make a real difference on the battlefield. The show of support comes as Ukrainian forces struggle to hold back a Russian advance close to its second largest city of Kharkiv.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Megumi Lim, who's in Kyiv. So, Megumi, Blinken meeting Zelensky and offering reassurance about US support.
That's right. First of all, Blinken's surprise visit to Kiev was his fourth visit to the capital since the full-scale war began. But this was his first visit since the U.S. Congress finally approved additional military aid for Ukraine last month. Now, this two-day visit comes at a very, very difficult time for Kiev. Ukrainian troops are trying to repel advancing Russian forces in the country's northeast after Moscow launched a major ground offensive there last weekend. Now, the main objective of this visit, however, is for Blinken to discuss with top Ukrainian officials and also with President Zelensky on how Ukraine can take back the initiative on the battlefield, especially as more weapons are expected to arrive from the United States to the front lines in Ukraine. Now, President Zelensky, in his meeting with Blinken, thanked the U.S. for this crucial military aid, but he also stressed the importance of faster arms deliveries and also asked for more air defense systems. He said Ukraine needs 2 more Patriot air defense batteries for the country's northeast Kharkiv region, which is, again, as I mentioned earlier, is coming under intensified Russian attacks. Now, Blinken did reiterate continued and unwavering support, American support for Ukraine, and he did say that more U.S. military assistance was on its way. Let's hear what he had to say.
We're determined, along with many other partners for Ukraine, to make sure that you succeed on the battlefield. We're equally determined that over time, Ukraine stands strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. A strong, successful, thriving, free Ukraine is the best possible rebuke to Putin and the best possible guarantor for your future. And for all of that, the United States is and will remain a committed partner.
So Ukraine, of course, welcoming this offer of weapons and weapons systems, but they must, of course, be thinking about when they'll actually get there.
That's right. It is very, very important for these arms deliveries and more weapons to arrive on the front lines for Ukrainian troops as they struggle to repel advancing Russian forces, as I mentioned earlier, especially in the country's northeast Kharkiv region. Right now, Ukrainian troops are in need of more artillery shells and ammunition to try to fend off these advances and also to strike at Russian positions on the front lines. But not only that, they're also in need of more long-range weapons to strike at Russian supply lines deep behind enemy lines to try to degrade Moscow's ability to mount these attacks. And of course, as President Zelensky mentioned today, more air defense systems to protect the skies over Ukraine from intensified Russian attacks, both on the front lines and also against Ukrainian cities. But the current battlefield situation thus raised the question of how much the U.S. Congress delays in approving additional military aid has exacerbated the situation on the battlefield and whether or not these arms deliveries have come too late. Russia has already claimed to have taken at least 9 villages in the northeast Kharkiv region, including today 1 more village, the village of Buravatka. And it is difficult to independently verify all of these claims, but if they are true, Moscow is on track to achieving its biggest battlefield breakthrough since the early days of the war.
Megumi, thank you very much. Our correspondent Megumi Lim in Kiev.
Georgian riot police and protesters have clashed outside the parliament in Tbilisi. Tensions are high following the passing of a bill that will force civil society groups and media organizations to declare foreign funding. Critics believe the legislation that is modeled on Russia's foreign agents law will be used to crack down on dissent. There were scuffles inside Parliament ahead of the final vote on the bill. The president says she will actually veto that bill, but the governing Georgia Dream Party can override that veto, setting the scene for further protests.
Hundreds of police officers are involved in a major manhunt in France after 2 prison guards were shot dead when their prison van was ambushed. 3 other guards were seriously injured. Video shows a car in flames that appears to have rammed the van. The inmates being transported escaped in the attack. The fugitive's been identified as a drug dealer nicknamed The Fly.
The French territory of New Caledonia has mobilized security forces, closed the international airport and imposed a curfew in the capital after protests against proposed voting reforms turned violent. Shops and buildings were set on fire and looting reported. New Caledonia's government has called for calm and condemned the destruction of property.
After 20 years in power, Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will step down from his post on Wednesday as part of a planned handover. Like his predecessors, Prime Minister Lee will remain part of the cabinet, sitting as a senior minister.
During his tenure, he steered Singapore through some turbulent times, as CGTN's Miro Lu reports.
As I prepare to hand over Singapore in good order to my successor, I feel a sense of satisfaction and completeness.
Charged with emotions and met with thunderous applause, Lee Hsien Loong delivered his last major speech as Singapore's third Prime Minister. In his 2 decades at the helm, Singapore has thrived. Total asset management climbed more than 8-fold to $3.6 trillion, while the annual GDP more than doubled to over $393 billion. PM Lee's pro-business policies and focus on building a skilled workforce have ensured that Singapore often ranks amongst the world's most competitive economies.
PM Lee is the leader who has brought Singapore's economy not just to first world standard, but to one that is innovation-driven. It's characterized by not just the knowledge-based industries, but also now at the forefront of technology, digital economy, digitalization of all sorts of things.
Experts say that PM Lee gave equal impetus to social policies during his time in order to build an open and inclusive society.
He's demonstrated in terms of social policy a lot of moves to ensure that the people who are disadvantaged, disabled, people who are low-wage, low-skilled workers get far more support that they need in order to feel included in mainstream society.
On the international stage, PM Lee has been a strong advocate of economic openness and multilateralism. Like his father, he has strategically positioned Singapore as a bridge between the East and the West. Despite rising geopolitical tensions, Singapore has managed to maintain strong ties with both China and the U.S.
Singapore engages both countries based on its national interests. Although we start out very strongly in terms of economics, being the anchor of relationship, over the past 20 years, the Singapore-China relationship has also deepened and broadened into many other areas of cooperation like digital trade, digital economy, green financing, including transitional financing, even cooperation on biomedicine.
Prime Minister Lee has built a robust foundation for Singapore, and maintaining these strong international ties will certainly be a priority for the incoming PM. Domestically, Lawrence Wong's immediate task is to assemble a capable cabinet and to win a strong mandate in the next general elections, which will have to be called by November next year. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still to come, conflicts in Gaza and Sudan push the number of internally displaced people to the highest levels ever recorded.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail,
In
the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Sally Baudet. The headlines once more. Driving up trade tensions, the US hikes tariffs on multiple Chinese imports, including EVs. Beijing says it will retaliate. And Human Rights Watch says Israel has carried out at least 8 attacks on aid groups in Gaza since the conflict began.
Now, it's a record that no one wanted to be broken. Wars around the world have pushed the number of internally displaced people to the highest level ever recorded. With conflicts raging in Gaza, Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo, the number of internally displaced people rose to nearly 76 million in 2023, up 50% from 5 years ago. In Gaza, people have been forced to move multiple times to escape Israeli bombardment, creating a total of 3.5 million displacements and over 1.5 million Palestinians being internally displaced by the end of 2023. In Sudan, the number was nearly double that, with 6 million displacements since civil war broke out in April 2023 between the army and rival paramilitary forces. Well, Christelle Kazaba is head of programmes at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre, the organisation behind this report. Welcome to the programme, Christelle. Good to see you. Sadly, of course, this isn't the first time the world has seen multiple conflicts at the same time. So why are we seeing so many displaced people now?
Yes, you're right. Actually, year after year, we break this record, sadly. This year is quite exceptional. We do have 5 million more people living in internal displacement compared to our previous record at the end of 2022. And we have several reasons behind this increase. Most of the people that were internally displaced in 2023 were so because of conflicts and violence, as you rightly pointed. We do have about 1 in 10 of them who were displaced as a result of disasters as well. But what is really leading to this increase is the fact that the people who were newly displaced in 2023 are actually millions that come in addition to millions of others who were previously displaced in years or even decades before that.
So what kind of situation do internally placed people find themselves in? What kind of conditions can they be living in?
Yes, this varies greatly, actually, from one country to another, as you can imagine, but also from one context to another, whether the person was displaced under conditions of violence and conflict, as we just saw in the news about Gaza or even Ukraine, or whether they were displaced in the context of preventative evacuations before a disaster, for instance. So these vary greatly. But what we do see, however, is a recurring trend that the people who were most vulnerable to begin with are hit the hardest. So they are the ones who are most at risk of being displaced and then who suffer the negative consequences of this displacement most.
So different situations, as you point out, and presumably they need different things. But what can the international community do to help?
Yes, and indeed, the international community does need to help, because even though internal displacement is a national sovereignty issue and it falls in the responsibility of national governments to care for their displaced citizens, in many countries, as we see in Sudan that you just mentioned and many others, actually the crises are so complex that they cannot do it alone. So what the international community can do about this is help raise awareness, help raise funding. Fundamentally, this is the bulk of the issue, is really the lack of funding, and also invest in longer-term solutions beyond the necessary humanitarian aid. We also need long-term support for these displaced people, like I said, often displaced for years or decades.
So you mentioned that this is a record that sadly keeps being broken. What happens next? Is there any hope of things improving, or are we just going to see this record being broken once again?
Well, we do want to have hope, and we do highlight in our report that was just released today several examples of initiatives that governments have led or contributed to with their partners in different contexts in countries that are helping to decrease these figures, but they are still in a much too small a scale to contribute to reducing the global figure next year. So what we fear is that with the rise of more conflicts this year, the continuation of the conflict in Palestine and in Sudan and in Ukraine, as you just mentioned, we are afraid that this figure will keep rising. So what we need to do is really invest further, like I said, in longer-term development solutions, but also, of course, in continued efforts for peace building, in disaster risk prevention, climate change mitigation, and more.
Christelle, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Christelle Kazaba from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre.
Thailand's rice production is expected to fall by 3.5 million tonnes this year because of a heat wave in Southeast Asia. Farmers have seen smaller yields and spiralling costs. It's a blow to the agricultural sector, which employs around 1/3 of the labour force. Our correspondent, Desita Sarkar, reports.
For many years now, the headlines have been the same. Heat wave, drought devastates agriculture. The pictures have also been the same. Rivers running dry, canals with no water, lands parched and cracked. When your livelihood depends on farming, these pictures become all too real. When you work in agriculture in one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, you are faced with a cascade of risks every single year. Risks that are pushing Saman and Thailand's more than 12 million farmers closer to a breaking point, where just one failed harvest can lead to unsustainable levels of debt.
This year is the worst. There's no water in the canal for agriculture in our area. Planting will be delayed again. Farmers are faced with more and more problems.
For the past few weeks, Thailand's sun has been brutal. A dangerous and record-smashing heat wave, cities recording all-time high temperatures of more than 44 degrees Celsius. No commercial crop was designed to tolerate the extreme heat, and nothing is spared. Not cassava, not sugarcane, not coconuts, or even durian, the king of fruits. But it's Thai rice and its growers that are bearing the brunt. Around 60% of agricultural land is allocated for rice farming, and it's this cash crop that has made Thailand the world's second largest exporter. It's a staple food for more than half of the world's population, one of the most important crops in sustaining global food security.
For most farmers, this has become a story of coping rather than thriving, and finding ways to adapt to an environment that scientists have been warning for years is becoming harder as the weather becomes more erratic. This is not only a major concern for Thailand's agricultural sector, but also a concern for global food security.
The next 2 decades where the temperature will be increased around 1 up to 2 degrees Celsius. The rice production will be dropped around 10 up to 13%. Thailand will be export less amount of food to the world market, and that will have the implication to the global food security.
As the globe warms and its climate alters with a ferocity unparalleled in recent history, farmers, the very soul of Thailand's once bountiful landscapes, find themselves on the front line, battling an enemy that threatens not just their livelihoods, but our collective future food security. Lucita Sao Gao, CGTN, Thailand.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Traditional Asian dance that's making waves in American schools.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Marseille was the starting point of the Olympic flame as it makes its way across France, ending in Paris on the 26th of July for the opening ceremony.
CGTN's Natalie Carney was in the city for its arrival and spoke to one of the torchbearers about what being asked to carry the flame means to him.
Arnaud Dulon couldn't believe it when he was asked to be an Olympic torchbearer. He works at the French pharmaceutical and healthcare firm Sanofi, a major sponsor of the Games.
There was a lot of communication in the company, and they sent a short email saying you can apply to be a torchbearer. And at that time, it was very clear for me it's a unique opportunity. So I applied, sent a letter to explain why I was motivated to do so. And by chance, I'm here today.
The Olympic flame is intended to signify unity, a symbol of everything the Games represent. Arnaud didn't hesitate to reply to that email with a letter explaining his motivation.
For me, being a torchbearer is a unique opportunity to celebrate the Olympic Games. Definitely, there is a lot of values behind Olympic Games that are resonating for me around excellency, around also being able to have a high performance, and also it's something around the world, you know. It's a kind of union, a time of peace, a time of being together. You can compete and be friends, and in today's world, I think it means a lot.
Arnaud and his family were part of the more than 230,000 onlookers who descended on the French port city of Marseille to welcome the arrival of the Paris 2024 Olympic flame on board the historic French ship, the Belém.
Yeah, I got 3 kids, and for them, you know, I'm already the gold medal boy, you know.
Early the next morning, in a historic neighborhood of Marseille, Arnaud's family and many others eagerly await the exciting moment as the torch begins its journey through the city.
On est un petit peu surpris et très excités. C'est une belle journée et puis
We are very excited. It's a beautiful day and we didn't expect all this to happen. It's very extraordinary. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for my husband and for the whole family. It's a pleasure to be here.
Est-ce que tu es heureux?
Are you happy?
Yes.
The moment arrives. Arnaud receives the flame from the previous torchbearer. He then jogs with it about 200 meters, greeting people along the way. All across France, enthusiastic crowds have been gathering, some waiting hours for a fleeting glimpse of the torch. In total, 10,000 torchbearers will help transport the flame across France and its territories before arriving in the capital, Paris, on July 26th for the opening of the Games. Natalie Carney, CGTN, in Marseille.
The U.S. state of California is celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Events include an activity that's becoming increasingly popular in Californian high schools, lion dancing. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
Colorful costumes, props, and drum beats fill the streets of San Francisco Chinatown in anticipation of the annual Interleague High School Lion Dance Competition. With this year being the special year of the dragon, the theme has changed to honoring the mythical beast, making the competition extra fierce.
This competition is a featured event for Asian American and Pacific Islander Month in California. 7 high school teams are competing with more than 100 performers. Norman Lau oversees the high school clubs and believes the artistic activity is increasing in popularity.
I think for us, it's been growing definitely, and I would say we got 600 signups this fall at the 7 schools, right? So it was pretty amazing to see that, but pre-pandemic, we did have hold those numbers too, but right now I think that it's just on a different level.
Preparing for this day took plenty of work. Lowell High School Lion Dance Club President Tegan Lee says being a member requires a major time commitment.
We've been practicing about 3 to 4 times a week, so right after school or even on the weekends. Usually a practice can go from 2 to even 5 hours. It's definitely very jam-packed. We're teaching something new every day.
Jimmy Hsu is a first-year performer who says it's not only physically challenging, but also mentally.
Sometimes it's difficult and physical, but it trains you for mentally. Because everyone it's not that they're incapable of doing it, it's their mind stopping them from doing it.
With his family being born in China, Hsu says lion and dragon dancing has allowed him to reconnect with Chinese culture. Non-Chinese high school students are also participating in the arts in greater numbers too.
Like some of these performances, I've gotten kind of an inside view of it that I wouldn't have seen if I didn't join. So I feel like there is some valuable knowledge that comes with joining.
It allows me to see more of how Chinese people like to celebrate and what they see as their passion. And I feel like their passions are really interesting and also really fun.
While the competition is intense, organizers say winning is secondary to the importance of preserving culture and passing it on to the next generation. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
The headlines again. Driving up trade tensions. The U.S. hikes tariffs on multiple Chinese imports, including EVs. Beijing says it will retaliate.
Human Rights Watch says Israel has carried out at least 8 attacks on aid groups in Gaza since the conflict began.
And Antony Blinken is in Ukraine to reassure Zelensky on U.S. weapons deliveries. Russia intensifies its assault on Kharkiv.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you so much for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. For all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.